You know, in our culture, we're constantly told to strive for excellence, right? To be the best. But what if that's not the whole story? Should we always be pushing for the top, or has our obsession with winning actually created a kind of toxic culture of merit? And what if the very stories we tell ourselves about success and failure, what if they're designed to hide a system that's already broken? Let's dive into this, because it's a really complex and fascinating debate.
So let's kick things off with this really powerful line from columnist Sakshi Sethi. It forces us to confront a hard truth, doesn't it? It suggests that our cultural standards aren't set by what we praise, but by the lowest possible bar we're willing to accept.
And that, of course, leads to a pretty uncomfortable question. By trying to be kind or compassionate, or maybe just easier on ourselves and each other, are we accidentally creating a whole society that just settles for good enough?
All right, so first up, let's dive into the argument that, yeah, maybe we are becoming too complacent. This perspective suggests our collective standards are slipping, and believe it or not, our good intentions might be the culprit. What Sethi is saying is that phrases like, it's okay, or hey, at least you tried, are basically just band-aids for failure. Sure, they're meant to make us feel better, but they also take away the incentive to actually be better. They blur the line between what's acceptable and what's exceptional, and they teach us that effort is what counts, not the actual result.
And you can really see the two different mindsets here, side by side. Sethi argues that when we tolerate inaction and inconsistency, what we get is a culture of excuses. But to build a culture of excellence, well, she says we need the exact opposite. Crystal clear expectations, consistent standards, and the courage to actually hold people accountable. So here's the bottom line to this whole argument. Shielding people from the discomfort of failure also robs them of the chance to grow. I mean, if there are no real consequences for underperforming, what's the motivation to push yourself beyond the bare minimum?
But hold on a second. What if this relentless drive for excellence has a dark side? That brings us to our next section, where we're going to explore this idea, championed by the philosopher Michael Sandel, that our obsession with merit has become its own kind of tyranny.
Sandel comes up with this fantastic term, meritocratic hubris. It's the idea that in a system where we all believe success is earned, the winners start to think they're just fundamentally better people. They completely forget about the luck, the advantages, and all the help they had along the way, and they start looking down on everyone who didn't make it.
And this is where you can see just how deep this thinking really goes. The language of deservingness, as Sandel points out, isn't just in some cheesy motivational tapes. It's everywhere. It's even in a New York Times recipe, of all places. This subtle shift in our language makes us feel like success and failure are purely a matter of personal virtue. And here is the other, brutal side of that coin. For the people who don't win in this system, the message is absolutely crushing. It's not just about losing a job or having less money. It's this profound sense of humiliation, this fear that you've literally become useless to the society you live in. Okay, so we have these two powerful, clashing ideas, but what if there's an even deeper mechanism at play here? Academic Paul Patrick argues we're not just arguing about standards, we're telling stories to protect the system itself. Now, this is a really challenging thought, so stick with me. Patrick's work invites us to question the very stories we tell about mediocrity. What if blaming an individual for their failure isn't really about upholding standards, but about deflecting criticism from a system that might be setting people up to fail from the start? So Patrick outlines this narrative pattern he calls the mediocre artist scapegoat. It's kind of brilliant. Here's how it works. First, the system sets a nearly impossible standard. Then, when someone inevitably fails, we don't question the standard. We blame the person's character. After that, we point to some rare genius who succeeded as proof that the system is totally fair. The individual becomes a scapegoat, and the flawed system, it gets to stay completely unquestioned.
And this quote from the philosopher Theodor Adorno, which Patrick uses, really hits the nail on the head. True criticism shouldn't just focus on an individual's supposed psychological flaws. It should really investigate the possibility that the task itself was basically impossible from the get-go.
So with these three really different perspectives on the table, what's the bigger picture here? How do we pull this all together? This slide does a great job of laying it all out. Sakshi Sethi sees the problem as cultural complacency. We're too soft. Michael Sandel sees it in the moral rot of meritocracy. We're too harsh. And Paul Patrick argues it's all a narrative trick we play on ourselves to protect a broken system. Each one is pointing to a different source of this same feeling of unease. So when you look at it all together, you start to realize
Maybe the debate isn't really about pushing for excellence versus accepting mediocrity. Maybe the real challenge is to take apart and rethink this entire framework of winners and losers, a framework that seems to be causing harm whether you're at the top, the bottom, or somewhere in the middle.
And that leaves us with one final massive question. Is it even possible to encourage people to do their best, to achieve great things, without creating a system that breeds arrogance in the successful and shame in everyone else? How do we value great achievement without devaluing the person who simply tried their best at what might have been an impossible task?